Good afternoon. My name is Chris Yoder, and I've been the editor of the Yoder newsletter since 1983. I'd like to welcome you all. This is a special gathering, a special time for a special man. We've researched over the last 43 years all the different branches of the Yoder family, and certainly Captain Jacob Yoder stands out as a real hero among the family and a very prominent individual. So we're so pleased that Sean and Vicki offered up a tour, and that we could hold a mini Yoder reunion here over this fourth holiday. And I'd like to tell you a little about Captain Jacob and the Yoder surname, where it originated, how he came to be, and then talk about the Yoders in America today and the populations of those Yoders. Surnames started to be used in Switzerland around the year 1200, and a historian traced the surname Yoder to Saint Theodorus, contracted as Saint Yoder, Yoder with a J, which is the way they spell it in Germany and Switzerland. He was a missionary monk who brought Christianity to Switzerland over the Alps from Italy in the 4th century AD. He came to be honored throughout the region, and in 1981, Luxembourg issued a postage stamp to commemorate the 1600th anniversary of his appointment as a bishop. The Swiss Reformed Church still celebrates August 16th as St. Yoder's Day, so naturally we American Yoders do the same. The name Theodore comes from two Greek words, theos meaning God, and doron meaning gift, so literally God's gift. Now my wife Carol and I have been married for almost 53 years, and often she thinks of me as more of a booby prize than a gift. But I hope you all are gifts to your family and to your community. The Yoders in Switzerland, according to the Swiss Encyclopedia, centered on the town of Steffensburg as early as 1529. It's in the Canton of Bern. And then the adjacent town of Muri slightly thereafter. You see the church tower in this picture. That church was still there when our Yoders left town. Many of the pieces of it are original to that time. There are two families of Yoders, with a J again, living in the town of Steffensburg, and this is one of them. His name's Andreas Yoder. He was raised in Steffensburg, and he sends along a happy 4th of July greeting to us all today from his home near Zurich. Now, combing through church and other records, German Yoder family researchers pieced together a Yoder heritage going back to the 13th century. And of particular interest to American Yoders is the family of Casper Yoder, who married Margaret Henning in 1596. In the lower right-hand corner, you see on the upper right-hand corner, you see their marriage record from the church records in Steffensburg. Two of their children, Nicholas and Joost, both married cousins named Anna Traxel on October 14, 1642. And they had large families, and we know that in each of those families, they had descendants who came to America. And we want to focus on one particular person in this chart. If you look under Nicholas and look at the fourth person across, Adam Yoder. He married a Barbara Oxenbein, and he had sons Hans and Joost Yoder, both of whom are among the first Yoders to come to America about 1710. Hans was born in 1672 in Steffensburg, and in 1609, a church record in Schwetzingen, Germany, records that Hans Yoder and his family left Germany and left the congregation for the island of Pennsylvania. Now, we don't know exactly where they sailed into or what boat they sailed on, but we do know that by April 29th of 1711, Hans, then a widower, married a second wife, Anna Rosina Liddy. Historians say that in 1700, who would like to guess how large a population Philadelphia had in 1700? Anybody in the audience? It was bigger than Taylorsville, let me give you that. It was only 1,000 larger than the 1,600 people here in Taylorsville, according to the internet today. It was 2,600 people at that. Now, Hans the immigrant, who we use the code in the Yoder family information on the Yoder newsletter website, which is yodernewsletter.org, settled by 1714 in property of 461 acres. You can see the picture of the house is still there today. It's no longer owned by Yoder family members, but carved into the lintel above one of the doorways in the home is what you see on the upper right, the name of Hans Yoder and his wife Anna Rosina. The earliest signature we have of Yoders in America are on a 1720 petition to make the Ole Valley area a separate township of Berks County, Pennsylvania. And you see those signatures signed as John Yoder and his brother Yost Yoder. Let's see. Near the signature of Yost on this petition was the signature of a gentleman named George Boone. George Boone and the Boone family had connections to the Yoders that lasted over many generations. George Boone was the grandfather of a Kentucky famous person, Daniel Boone. He was also the grandfather of Daniel's brother, Squire Boone, who had some connections and interface with Captain Jacob years later. Yeah, both of the immigrant brothers died in 1741 and are buried in the Pleasantville Union Cemetery. Hans's son John, who was the grandfather of Captain Jacob, was born about 1700 in Europe. In 1735, he received a part of his father's original acreage to build his own house, now at 13 Yoder Road in Ole, Pennsylvania. The original indenture shown on this page is now on display at the House of Yoder, a family historical site at the Penn Alps Artisan Village in Cransville, Maryland. Several of our national Yoder reunions have included visits to this property, which is still owned after all this time in hands of members of the Yoder family. Jacob's grandfather, John, bought property in 1732, about a mile away from the homestead, and built a mill on it. It is believed that Captain Jacob's father and his family may have lived on and operated the mill. In 1767, the grandfather sold the mill property to Casper Geismer, and is called the Geismer Mill today. It burnt down at one point, and that was rebuilt, and this is what it looks like now. Captain Jacob's father, John Jr., married in 1746 to Sarah Schenkel. Dr. Glisson's connected to the Schenkel family. They had children starting with Daniel in 1748, then Barbara and Martin. Jacob himself was born in 1758, and then another son, Samuel, who was born in the early 1760s. In 1753, when Captain Jacob was about 5, John Jr. was deeded 13 Yoder Road property by his father. The brass plaque you will see on Jacob's grave, when you go to visit the homestead this afternoon, claims that Jacob was born in Reading, which was the largest town in the area of the old township. But another reference claims that he was born at the mill during the time his father ran it. However, a historian many years later visited with the family at the homestead and recalled a visit probably in the 1790s by Jacob, who came back to Pennsylvania by horseback, in which they rejected the Reading location on the plaque and said he was born right here. And they talked about the visit with their uncle and what he told about the war and the Indian conflicts and so forth. Family life in the home did not seem ideal. John Jr. was said to have been intemperate, which probably means he was a drinker. And there were many domestic squabbles. One day when he was away from home, the wife Sarah, with the help of her brother, took what they could carry off, leaving the young children behind. The desertion by Sarah seems to have occurred sometime by 1761, when Jacob would have been about 3 years old. As we have records for her showing her separately living in Reading in the years 1762, 1764, and 1779. During that time, she had an illegitimate child who grew up to be a good man, prominently recognized and known, but I don't know his name. In 1771, John Jr. deeded the 13 Yoder Road property to his oldest son, Daniel. Now, Jacob's daughter, Eliza, wrote a short family history, which is on file at the Filson Historical Society in Louisville. She reports that he left home at 13, which was the same year his brother got the property. She says that prior to the war, he conducted a modest business, driving livestock to the frontier settlements, which apparently included becoming familiar with the Ohio River area and as far as Kentucky. Eliza writes that Jacob enlisted in 1766 at the age of about 17, and he served for 2 years in 7 encampments. A great-grandson, in his application for membership in the Sons of the American Revolution, said that Jacob fought in the Jerseys, which would have included him being a part of Washington's Christmas Eve crossing of the Delaware and the Battle of Trenton, where Hessian forces lost 22 killed in action, including their commander, 83 wounded, and 896 captured. The Americans suffered only 2 deaths during the march and 5 wounded from the battle, one of whom included a near-fatal shoulder wound to future President James Monroe. Additional battles that he fought in, including Brandywine Creek, a British victory, but it was noteworthy for the fact that a 20-year-old Frenchman named Marquis de Lafayette first won his recognition there. On October 4th of 1777, he fought at Germantown, following which he spent the long, cold winter with Washington at Valley Forge. There, on the barefooted arrival of 17,000 to 14,000 troops, Valley Forge suddenly became the 3rd largest city in America. Starvation and disease would kill nearly 2,000 of these soldiers, and perhaps as many as 1,500 horses. But our Jacob survived. After the war, he operated packhorse trains from Philadelphia, taking supplies to Fort Redstone on the Monongahela River not far from Pittsburgh. During his time at Valley Forge, he met John Fish, who was to become renowned as an inventor and engineer in operating the first steamboat on service on the United States on the Delaware River. They talked about Kentucky land, and Captain Jacob had already become familiar with that area, how they both planned to go there after the war to survey property for which they might apply against their military warrants that they earned from service. In 1780, Fitch joined Jacob as a crew member when he bought a flatboat at Fort Redstone and flatted it loaded with horses and cattle down the Ohio to Kentucky. They were attacked by Indians at the mouth of the Big Sandy River in Kentucky, wounding 2 of the crew, killing 2 cows, and wounding other livestock. They continued on to their destination in Kentucky, probably around Louisville, where they both would look for land. And Fitch surveyed some land for both himself and Captain Jacob in what was then Nelson County, including in the area that he was to later purchase. A couple years later, in May of 1782, he started off on a history-making trip from Fort Redstone with a load of flour from the Westmoreland County gristmill of Gaspard Markle, a former Berks County resident, then living in western Pennsylvania. Jacob is said to have, elsewhere that he had on that boat, more livestock that he was taking down, but in this one reference it talks about Markle flour being traded for furs in Louisiana, and then on reaching New Orleans, he took the furs to Cuba where they traded for sugar, and he returned to Philadelphia by boat, making a nice profit for this groundbreaking journey. On other such trips made subsequently, they were not quite as financially rewarding, but Markle's son continued the tradition and floated several loads of flour down to New Orleans over the next few years. In 1784, Captain Jacob settled in Bardstown, where Fitch was also living, and is said to have traded with the Indians and visited Vincennes in Indiana and St. Louis in Missouri. And during the Northwest Indian Wars, he furnished several of General Mad Anthony Wayne's regiments with 50 horses, all laden with provisions. That war ended with the Battle of Fallen Timbers, shown here, in 1794, and then the Treaty of Greenville the following year. By the mid-1790s, he was ready to settle down, and in 1794 he married Mary Mosman in Bardstown, where daughter Eliza was born in 1795. In 1803, he began construction of the home he would later name Beachland because of the many beech trees there, especially along Wolf Run Creek. We're going to visit this home today, thanks to Vicki and Sean. Their second daughter, Mary, would be born in 1810. Eliza would marry Frenchman David Roselle Poniard in 1824 and later inherit and live on the Beachland property, later renamed by him as Vaucluse. In 1835, daughter Mary would marry Mason Brown, who was to become the Secretary of State and State Treasurer of Kentucky. His father, John Brown, as mentioned earlier, represented Virginia in Continental Congress and the U.S. Congress, in which role he introduced the bill that granted statehood to Kentucky, and he became one of the first Kentucky senators. On April 7th, 1832, Jacob died at Beachland and is buried in the family cemetery. During the homestead tour today, I understand that we will begin with a memorial service at the family cemetery, and in 1834, the first iron-graved tablet to be cast west of the Alleghenies was sent from Cincinnati by Yoder's friend Captain Joseph Pierce and placed over Yoder's burial site. It was cast by the newly formed Hanks and Niles Foundry, later famous for casting heavy bells, chines, and steam machinery. Here are pictures of some of the family members thanks to the archives at Liberty Hall in Frankfort. At upper left is David Roselle Poniard, a Frenchman from Boston who became the husband of oldest daughter Eliza. Jacob was reportedly not pleased with this marriage, and a family story reports that while the marriage was taking place inside the house, he sat on the back porch and whittled. To the right is youngest daughter Mary Yoder Brown. Some of the grandchildren are shown in the bottom row. From left to right are two of Eliza's children, daughter Eliza Poniard Weisner, and their son Yoder Poniard, who inherited the homestead, and next to him his cousin, Mary's son, John Mason Brown, one of the founders in 1884 of the Filson Historical Society in Louisville, where Eliza's biographical writing on her father can be found. Yoder Poniard never married and is referred to in newspaper articles as having been the wealthiest man in Spencer County. In 1906, he sold the homestead to John Mason Brown's brother, Knox Brown, Joe's great-grandfather, and moved into what was called the Spencer House here in Taylorsville. Shortly before his death, he had given the Knoll property in Taylorsville to the citizens of the town if they would promise to build a school on top of the natural formation. The school was named after Poniard Brown, the Yoder Poniard. He was killed by a train at the Main Street crossing in Taylorsville on August 28th.